Ha!
Yes. Hi. People have been talking about this literally since before I was born, or at least before I was a part of any sort of FGC. But I'm new here, and although I may not really have anything new to add, I still want to talk about this because talking about video games is fun. In 1987, Street Fighter 1 released in arcades, and despite a rocky original release with the weird pressure-sensitive buttons, it managed to become pretty successful once they updated the cabinet to have the 6-button layout we all know and love, selling somewhere in the realm of 50,000 units. And this is in arcade time, so that is more than it sounds like. Among the aforementioned weird nipple buttons, Street Fighter 1 pioneered the concept of the motion input. Ken and Ryu have different attack strengths that correspond to each of the different buttons, but they also have access to 3 special moves: Hadouken, Tatsumaki Senpukyaku, and Shoryuken. You access these specials by doing a motion on your stick and hitting one of your buttons, and I'll be real, they sucked. They were awful. They would tank the frame rate, they did way too much damage, and the only 2 playable characters had the exact same specials between them with no variation. Like, it was balanced, but it was boring. They had the same normals and the same specials tied to the same motions. Quarter circles forward and back with the DP. So why would you pick one of them over the other? Someone had to be player 2. Fast forward 4 years and Capcom decided to make Street Fighter again, but good, and would you look at that? New genre. There is a lot of shit in this game that was nowhere to be found in SF1, probably the most notable of which being the 6 new dudes they added. Beyond being new faces that players could and would get attached to, the World Warriors brought not only new moves, but new ways of accessing them. I mentioned it earlier, Ken and Ryu traditionally have 3 motions for their specials: a quarter circle forward, quarter circle back, and a DP motion, which is forward, down, down, forward. So in Street Fighter 1, there weren't any other motions. So if you just weren't good at doing those, or they weren't comfortable to you, tough shit. But Street Fighter 2 came around and changed that. While some of the new characters still used those same motions that Ken and Ryu had, there were a lot of new ideas on display. They came up with mash inputs, half circles, and the video game equivalent of churning butter. Joking aside, this actually did contribute to something I think is really interesting. Characters have different properties to their moves, regardless of how they control, and that can already be a big part of deciding who you want to play. If you like playing hyper-aggressive rushdown, you're probably going to gravitate towards a character whose toolset fits that, with the same thing being true for any other playstyle. What I think is cool is how motion inputs sort of add another layer to this, right? Like, the motion behind a move influences what situations you can use them in, and depending on the game, you might be locked out of other actions due to the motion. You block in a traditional fighting game by holding back on your stick, so any special that you want to access that requires a non-back input leaves you vulnerable. Given that a DP is usually an invincible reversal, you can see how this introduces risk-reward to the player in their decision-making. Additionally, there are some inputs that are really hard to do without hiding the input behind another animation. Although 360 inputs don't actually require you to rotate the stick a full 360 degrees, rather you just have to hit all 4 cardinal directions, it is not the easiest thing in the world to do a standing SPD. So what you can do is hide the input behind a jump, or the recovery of a normal, or whatever, so you don't have to worry about executing a jump instead of your command grab. But beyond these 2 examples, I think there's one character who really embodies this whole idea better than anyone else. Guile was the original charge character. A charge input is when you hold the stick in one direction for roughly a second, it varies from game to game, then slam it in the opposite direction and hit a button. Guile only has 2 special moves, and they're both charge. Sonic Boom is probably the best projectile in every Street Fighter game that it's in, and Flash Kick is easily one of the best anti-airs. Booms recover so much faster than every other fireball that if Ryu and Guile both throw out a fireball and they clash, Guile will be able to act so much sooner than Ryu that he can do what we call a Shoto kill. So you might be asking, if you want to chuck Plasma, why wouldn't everyone just pick Guile? He just has the best projectile. Well, it's a charge move. If you move the stick in any other direction, you lose the charge for Boom, and the same thing goes for holding down in Flash Kick. They are very strong moves that are balanced by the motions they're tied to. If you walk forward at all, you immediately lose all charge. So, because of this, Guile naturally lends himself to, If Guile firmly plants himself on the other end of the screen, holding down back, good luck, asshole. Guile isn't just a zoner. He is the zoner. He wants to control larger distances of space than the majority of the cast because of how his tools are suited for longer ranges. He does have some command normals that he can use to reposition himself while maintaining charge, but that doesn't change the fact that he is primarily designed to maintain pressure from a distance better than every other character. Now, going back to the example with him and Ryu, there are a lot of advantages to having special moves tied to a motion as opposed to a charge. If you're point blank and Guile has charge, yes, he's going to have better frame advantage, meaning he'll be able to act before Ryu. But he has to have charge. It doesn't matter how quickly you hold back on the joystick, you're locked out of using either of your specials until you build it. Ryu, he can just throw them out as much as he wants. Fuck, when he's walking forward, he's already doing the first motion of a Shoryu, which again is invincible on startup, letting you do walking Shoryus. You can approach with an invincible option. It's good. It's different from Guile's charge inputs, and they lend themselves to slightly more aggressive play, but they are situationally better. You get why I think this shit is cool? Like, you're approaching Guile and you're waiting for him to move in some way that'll break his down charge so he doesn't have access to flash kicks, but he can try and use that to bait a jump in, and it's cool. But why'd I make the video? It is becoming more common to either add a mode into modern fighting games where specials are performed with a single button, or to flat out remove motion inputs entirely. I want to make something clear. This is not inherently a bad thing. A lot of people get upset when a new fighting game gets announced and it's revealed that there's going to be some sort of simplified control scheme. So in addition to talking about how motion inputs work, I wanted to add my 2 cents on the topic. I like doing motions to access specials, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be exploring other input methods for new games. There are benefits to having specials tied to single buttons as opposed to a motion. The first one that always jumps out to me is that there are people with physical disabilities that literally prohibit them from being able to move the stick that quickly on command, and I am not going to gatekeep fighting games from the physically disabled. That being said, changing the input method necessitates a change in how games are designed. Because if you don't, you get one-button sonic booms and flash kicks, and if you do that, suddenly Guile becomes the best character in the game, and it is not close. Street Fighter 6 had to do a lot to keep its modern, whatever the fuck that means, control scheme relatively balanced, and it is still strong. You can't do one-button charge specials, character lose access to some of their normals, and you do less damage when you use modern controls compared to classic. If they didn't do this, Guile, best character, discussion over. And it's not a perfect system. Playing against a one-button DP doesn't feel great, and if your opponent gets access to enough meter to the point that they have an invincible super, and it's attached to one button, you don't really get to play the game. But in simplifying inputs, you remove an element of the mental stack from players. Is that a bad thing? It doesn't have to be. I think what matters is that if you choose to remove the complexity from a game in one way, there should be another way that you've added complexity to compensate. Unless you want to make a less complex game in general, but we're not talking about that. We have one really great example of this. I don't think it's that controversial of a statement to say Super Smash Bros. Is a very successful franchise, and aside from a few assholes that got added more recently, nobody uses motion inputs to access their specials. They don't even have to, you just can if you wanna. And I would say that, at least on a competitive level, Smash is not a mechanically simple game. Everybody knows about wave dashing, but like, what about L canceling, shield dropping, light shielding, wave landing, crouch cancels, directional influence, and not a single motion input required? Moving away from all those specific pieces of tech, Smash and other games like it put a large emphasis on movement. They're platform fighters. They have movement systems reminiscent of platformers. Yahoo! Creating a system that allows players so much control over the position of their characters completely changes how you have to structure your game plan. A character's effective range is a lot larger than just the maximum range of their longest move because of how quickly your ranges can change based off of your positioning. So you aren't just inching in and out of footsie's distance, you're using your insane mobility options to keep yourself safe while poking with massive hitboxes or jump canceling shine on shield to maintain pressure without putting yourself at risk. Even beyond Smash and other platform fighters, there are more traditional fighting games that don't use motion inputs and have seen some form of success. It could be due to a bit of a gimmick like footsies and dive kick that are hyper simplistic, but it also might not be. Rising Thunder, Rest its Soul, was a fighting game that used one-button specials while still maintaining depth. It just wasn't in the execution of its special moves. One of your meters could be used for either a Guilty Gear style burst or what was basically an FADC from SF4. You have variations of the specials that you would choose between for your character. My point is just that, like, regardless of what the subgenre of the game is, execution isn't the only way depth can be achieved. But if that's the case, why do people get so mad when a new fighting game gets announced and we learn that there's going to be some form of simplified inputs? Well, the reason I find it frustrating a lot of the time has a lot to do with how they're implemented into pre-existing series or how they create elements of design that I don't really find fun. I mentioned it earlier, Street Fighter 6 has a system called Modern Controls that lets players perform specials and supers with only one button, motion removed. Street Fighter is generally not the fastest paced fighting game. You can react to most of your opponent's options in neutral since they move at a slower pace, with the amount of time it takes you to do a motion input being factored into the balance of the speed at which the game is played. No matter what, you can only do a DP motion so quickly, so you have to practice doing this motion on reaction, which takes time. With access to a one-button special though? You get my point? It doesn't change the actual startup animation of the move, but it changes how long it takes it to come out due to the ease of the input on the part of the player. It makes it so that in situations where you would generally have to guess on defense, you can react with an invincible super because of how much faster reaction time is with the simplified input. This isn't really something I think Street Fighter as a series was designed with in mind. It isn't broken, and people who think it is either need to just accept that or find a new hobby, but it can be frustrating because it feels out of place sometimes. All that being said though, I want to find new ideas for inputs in fighting games, both motion and otherwise. There are certain concepts I do not think would work outside of motion inputs, so I never want them to be gone. But I don't want to hold on to this idea that they're required for a new game to be successful when we know that they aren't. They have their place, and they don't need to be removed, but I don't think we're doing any harm by asking what that place is and by not forcing them into every new game that gets announced. Alright, I'm gonna go. I'll see y'all later. I better not catch anyone being ableist in the comments, yeah? Alright, see ya. Bye.